Hello, my name is Rob Akins. I'm from the Excel Professional Development Corps, and I'm going to talk for a few minutes today on letters of intent. So, oops. So what is a letter of intent? They are also called different things. Letters of inquiry, sometimes are pre-proposals. Some places might ask for a concept paper, and even letters of intent have been considered proposal cover letters. What they do is they provide information to a granting agency like Foundation or NIH, so they can figure out if they're interested in your proposal. They can figure out what the workload's going to be for a review, right? Yours is not the only letter of intent they will get, and then they can make plans. So helpfully, a letter of intent is an initial contact, depending on the context, that may or may not be required. A lot of times letters of intent are requested so that people can plan, but you don't have to do them. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a minute. Other places require them. Often they're non-binding. They're just sort of, this is what we're thinking of, so they can get ready on the other end. Sometimes they are. There's a letter of intent mechanism at NIH where you put in your letter of intent with the budget, and that's the budget you're going to use. They're often not reviewed as part of a subsequent application. Sometimes they are, but they are reviewed. So they may not be included with what you're going to propose eventually, but someone does read them and review them. So when you're doing a letter of intent, step number one with a lot of things is do your homework. This is information. So I try to find best practices. I've talked to you guys about this before. So a lot of this comes from UMass site. I adapted it from it. So in places where I took things and edited from UMass, you have their link at the bottom. So this is your first contact with a foundation. We use a foundation as an example of a letter of intent. As Aaron said, there's a letter of intent for MRDAs through the Excel program. But your first contact with that organization, whatever it is, should be going over their website, looking at their missions and goals. If you can get a hold of one, an annual report, how they're giving, right? How they award mechanisms, previous mechanisms. If you have any unanswered questions, you should contact your local OSP people first before you call the foundation. So do homework first. The OSP office may have experience with this foundation in the past, and they may actually be the ones who should contact the foundation on your behalf. Step two, you determine if it's appropriate for you. So talk with your mentors and your OSP support. If it looks good, your next contact is going to be this letter of intent, or sometimes they're letters of inquiry. And you can distinguish those two things, although they're often used interchangeably. A letter of intent is something they asked for, usually. A letter of inquiry is like a cold call. For example, a foundation might say that proposals are not accepted, but that doesn't mean they're not funding proposals, right? You know, it can mean that they're not actively looking for them, and then your contact would be an inquiry. Hey, I have this idea. Are you guys interested? Important. So there's a few places in here where it's bolded in big letters. A letter of intent is not, I'm just going to read this, and this is exactly from the UMass site, is not a vague exploration of an idea. It is assumed by the reader of the letter of intent that you have already thought through the proposed project, including the budget, and that you're just presenting an abbreviated description. So it's important to keep in mind that the letter of intent implies that you already know what you're going to propose. Step three, you've got your letter of intent, you've thought it through, you want to ask other people to read it. You should ask people who are knowledgeable in your area, people with experience with the foundation, people that may have to approve your proposal if the LOI is accepted. But importantly, you should ask people to look at your letter of intent who represent the prospective audience. And one way you might be able to do that is through the Excel Community Engagement and Outreach Program. And I'm not sure who's on the call this morning, but they might be able to find someone that can take a look in sort of a non-conflicted way. If they work for the foundation, they may not be able to pre-review your LOI, but they are a good resource for that kind of thing. And think about the audience, right? Consider the prospective audience who's going to read this and try to find people like that too. And really, no kidding, you should get feedback on what you write, and the earlier the better. Step four, you submit, right? Go through the proper channels. So this is often OSP, some LOIs, depends on the mechanism. Like in the Moors, it depends on exactly what the LOI content is. If an investor can just send one or they have to go through OSP. But the important thing with step 4 is you got to continue working on your proposal. If the LOI is accepted, you may not have much time to get the actual proposal together. So keep that in mind. And in fact, before you submit the LOI, you should really have a pretty solid idea on what you're going to propose. All right, so here's some do's and don'ts and best practices. Really ask other people to read your draft, really. Remember, there are real people on the other end who are going to read it. They're often very passionate about what you're proposing to do, so keep that in mind when you're sending this thing. Follow the directions from the funding agency. And importantly, remember, and this is true of proposals in general, you're not asking them to help you. So this is sort of a do and don't. Don't ask them to help you. You are offering to help them. And that is a much better stance to take on a letter of intent and on a proposal in general. You don't want someone reading it saying this person is really needy. It sounds interesting, but we can't help them. You want them to go, oh, we need this person to help us. And realize that your idea may be a 1 in a million opportunity and a great idea, but your idea is also maybe one of a million letters of intent. So the more you can make it easy for the reviewer to read and have it stand out and be concise, the better. Don't use jargon or abbreviations unless they're their abbreviations. If they're their abbreviations, then you should use them because it shows that you read their website. Don't make things overly complex or focus too much on how hard the task will be. Again, you're offering to help them. So you want to explain how you will do that. If they're funding things like this, they know how hard it's going to be already. Make sure you correct any grammatical mistakes and don't put any obstacles in the way of the reader. So if they have a very specific format they want for the letter of intent, you should follow it. You might have a great idea to do something cool in the middle, but it may be an obstacle for someone who's trying to read through multiple letters of intent and they can't get through yours because something got switched around and don't take this the wrong way, you got a little too creative on the way you put it together. But no obstacles. So if format isn't specified, there is some advice, and this is now back to UMass. And again, this is edited from what they said. So there's some advice on how you can put one together. So the first summary statement is where you begin. It should stand alone, so whoever reads it should know what you're going to do, what's it going to cost, like the basic information. Make clear what you want the reader to do, right? You want them to consider funding the project if that's what the letter of intent's about, and usually that's what it is. Make sure that the paragraph answers who on your end wants to do what, how much you're requesting, is it part of a larger trajectory or bigger project, and if so, how is that? Is it funded by the institution, or is this part of something that's already funded by Excel or NIH? How long you're asking for money? Make sure you make the connection between the foundation's interest in your project. And that's not just saying I work on this disease or I'm interested in your foundation. An example is if you're responding to a specific request for proposals on the research topic, say that. How did you get linked to them? And keep it short, which sounds hard given as much as there is there. But one of the reasons you need a lot of people to read this is you want to be kind of short and sweet and have a really strong, excellent summary statement. 2, you focus on why. Explain what issue you are addressing. Explain why you have chosen to respond to the specific set of issues in the way that you're going to propose. State briefly why this matters in sort of the area you're working on and for the granting or the foundation or whoever's going to give you the money. It's an area they're interested in too, but tell them so that they know why this matters. And make sure you know who benefits and how the public good is achieved in the why. Why is this important? Then you go to part 3, which is the activities, the what and how, which is really the bulk of what you're trying to explain. They're going to pay you to do something. You got to tell them what you're going to do. So you give an overview of the activities. You can give as much detail, and it has to be the important details for the space restrictions that they say. And I didn't mention that. Some letters of intent are pretty long. There's a letter of intent that we're working on with NIH that's going to end up being about 10 pages long. Right? So the grant, R01 grant's 12. And a letter of intent, which explains some different things, is going to be almost as long. But given the space restrictions in the funding mechanisms description, give the details that you can and focus on the important details. Highlight your sort of innovation and why you're novel with what you're trying to do, and any special attention that their funding would sort of mean to getting that innovation up and running, right? So the foundation might be really interested in high risk, high reward. Let's get these advanced diagnostics out there. Let's figure out how this treatment works, or let's figure out what pathways associated with this disease that we've been working on for years. So if you have an innovation in that area, make sure you explain it and what their funding would help, how their funding would help. Talk about who's going to do what. Again, and if there's collaborations, be specific about those. And then the outcomes, make sure you talk about what you're hoping to achieve and how you're going to evaluate it. Again, this sounds like a lot and you're going to have a limited amount of space, and this sounds a lot like a full proposal, which it sort of is. It's just a summary of a full proposal, but make sure you tell them. Make sure you tell the people who are reading this is what's going to happen, and this is how I know what's going to happen if we do this work. You put your credentials, so you want to talk about why you. This is the why you that I talk about in specific aims, or why this PI. So this can be relatively short, but again, think of the reader. The reader might not know you, might not even know the institution where you're working, so you want to be able to tell them. Don't overstate things, but you do want to highlight awards, measures, things they can look up, things that set you apart and distinguish you in your ability to execute what you're going to propose. Budget. A lot of places ask for detailed budgets. Some, well, I won't say a lot. There's a range in what kind of budget information will be requested. Typically, the funding people want to know, well, how much money are we talking about and what are you going to use it for? That might be in general categories, or that might be specific, as in you have to have the final budget for the proposal you're going to submit if the LOI is accepted before you submit the LOI, which sounds a little like cart and horse reversed, but you really need to think through these things and check what they ask for on the site, or ask your OSP folks. Closing, always offer, if you need more, contact me. Give your contact information. You should thank the reader. You should thank, proactively sort of thank the reader of this letter of intent. If someone's read it and they're asking for more information, thank them again for having read it and for the opportunity. Be respectful of the fact that the people on the other end are real people who are trying to help you, and it's nice to thank them. And then if there's any specific information about contact, that you're going to call them, you would already talk to someone, you're following up with so-and-so, make sure that they're aware of that and that any of the timing that might be associated with those other interactions, right? If you have two streams of contact in particular with an agency or a foundation or anybody, it's good for them to know so that you don't get signals crossed and that everybody's aware of what's going on. All right? And then get the right person to sign it. Your OSP office should know who that person is. It might seem obvious that it would be the PI, but that's not always the case. It depends on the level of commitment in particular of what's going into the letter of intent. All right, and then finally, I think I'm over probably 10 minutes. I didn't time it, but I guaranteed Aaron I'd be quick. There is a letter of intent now requested for the MRDAs through the Excel program. So those are Mentored Research Development Awards. This is directly from the website. So letter of intent's one page. If you read down below, and that's due, I think it's still April 24th, or there may have been a change that Aaron can fill us in on. The full proposal is only 3 pages. So this letter of intent, which is just for an MRDA, what you're doing is you're proposing to work on a grant. So it's to offset someone who has clinical or teaching or administrative responsibilities that don't allow them to work on writing a competitive grant. So you have to tell the folks, this is us, the the targeted funding mechanism. So I'm going to use the MRDA to write this grant, an INBRI pilot award, an Excel pilot award. Provide an overview. Again, this is an overview. You only got one page. You have to have a mentor. This is mentor research development. So tell them who they are. And then name the individual who is going to release the MRDA scholar. Again, these are funds to make it possible to work on a grant where it's not currently possible because of other responsibilities. So if you're a clinician we're going to go ask if we can buy a day of your time for 6 months, essentially. Who's that person? We want to make sure that they will approve it and that it's possible within the workflows in your department. Same thing if you're teaching. So the letter is primarily used to start identifying reviewers, right? Because this is not a disease-focused or a specific kind of focus area. There are some priorities that Excel and the CTR program want to fund. So it's pretty broad. So the earlier you can let us know that you're going to apply, which is what this is really about, the better we can get ready to get the reviews done. All right. So there's no review actually, and there's no actual feedback. But those letters of intent are due soon, and then the full proposals are due on the 15th. All right. And there's a link down below for the CTR. And that is it. That is my advice on letters of intent. And thank you all for your attention.